amigos de More, friends of More, sorry. This is the English podcast. Today we talk about the Rojava Kurds. The Rojava Kurds must fight. They must fight. Who are the Rojava Kurds? Why should they fight? What does that mean for us who are worried about the future of Israel, the future of the West? That's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, let's get right into it. So the first thing I want you to be aware of is that we are publishing a couple of articles on the Rojava Kurds and why they must fight. And the first one is already up. So I think you're seeing my screen now. It's called "These Muslims Are Democrats, so why isn't the West helping?" Now, this is not a new article. This is an article that we are republishing from my old website. It was called Historical and Investigative Research. It was a labor of love. It's got lots of really good stuff. And every once in a while, I bring one of those articles over to Management of Reality. Now, you can go read historical and investigative research whenever you want. The address is hirhome.com. And it's going to be there. It's an archive, and you can read any of the articles there for free. But every once in a while, I feel that I need to bring some of that work to the attention of my audiences at Management of Reality, and this is one of those times. Who are the Rojava Kurds? All right. So if you read this article, which I wrote back in 2016, when the Rojava revolution happened, okay? If you read this, you will learn that the Rojava revolution is this remarkable phenomenon. What you see here in the photograph, in the cover photograph, is two young women holding rifles, fully bedecked for war. Well, these are Muslim women. These are Kurdish women. And the reason they seem the part of full equals to men is because that is what they are. And this is one of the things that the Rojava revolution accomplished. So let's get into the history of this. First of all, who are the Kurds? Let me give you a little map here so that you can see. Okay, this map is showing us the geographical distribution of the Kurds. Okay, the Kurds are a self-identifying ethnic group with their own language, Kurdish language, and they occupy, as you can see, a very uncomfortable geography. It's very difficult to create an independent Kurdistan when the geographic distribution of your ethnicity is overlapping with all of these countries. So as you can see, there's a big chunk of southeastern Turkey that is basically Kurdish. And then there's a tiny northeastern corner of Syria that is Kurdish. Then you've got the north of Iraq and the westernmost part, northwestern part of Iran. Okay. Very difficult. None of those countries want to give up any of their land. So how are you going to create an independent Kurdistan? This is a real challenge. But the Kurds have been trying anyway, and there are separatist movements of Kurds in all of these countries, okay? In all of these countries, the Kurds have been oppressed by the host country, and they have chosen to resist that and to try and build this dream of an independent Kurdistan. All right. So the leader of the Turkish Kurds, which is, of course, the largest group, his name is Abdullah Öcalan, and for a while he had a policy of fighting the Turkish government with guns, and he was accused of terrorist attacks, and apparently he owned up to that. And apologized and changed his ways and so forth. And there was a real, it really seems like there was a transformation there, because the Turkish government put him in prison. And in prison, so his movement used to be a communist movement. And while he was in prison, he read the eco-anarchist Murray Bookchin. I think eco-anarchist is the right category. Murray Bookchin is a philosopher. He's a libertarian slash anarchist philosopher. What does that mean? It means that Murray Bookchin believes the state is the enemy. Okay, when libertarians shade into anarchism, what they're saying is that they think the state as such is a huge problem for human freedom. Okay, I trend in that direction. I personally trend in that direction. So so Murray Bookchin is this kind of person. He's also a very important philosopher of environmentalism. Okay, so he's an eco-anarchist or eco-libertarian. And in his book, you know, in his work, he explains why he doesn't like the state, and why a truly, you know, a society that is truly respectful of the environment has to be a libertarian society, and all this stuff, right? So Abdullah Öcalan reads this while in prison, and he has a transformation, it seems. And he let all of his followers know that he was no longer a communist, no longer believed that. Now, this is a huge leap, right? Because if you're a communist, then you think the state is the solution to everything, right? This is what communists believe. Communists want everything to be owned and administered by the state. The state should be sovereign over everything. Whereas a libertarian thinks the state is the enemy, and the state should be either abolished or reduced to the smallest functionally necessary size, so that there is no opportunity for the state to begin oppressing us, right? So when we say that Abdullah Öcalan went from communism to libertarianism, we are saying he was completely transformed as a person, right? And this can happen. It's happened before. It's happened to many people, right? It's called a conversion experience, right? So this is apparently what happened to Abdullah Öcalan. So he let his followers know, I've become a libertarian. He wrote a book explaining his entire, because he developed a whole new philosophy of political organization based on reading Bookchin and thinking about this, and thinking about the Kurdish question in Turkey while he was in prison. All right, there was this ferment of personal philosophical growth and theory development, and he produced a book explaining all of this, his theory of confederalism, which basically says that political structure should be atomized. You should have very small political units that confederate for some important decisions, but don't lose any of their autonomy, and you should have almost no institutional structures above the independent cantons. All right, so it's a system sort of in some ways similar to the Swiss system, but much more radical much more radically in a libertarian direction. All right, so so he writes this book, and people follow him. All right, all of these former communists, or maybe not all of them, but many of these former communists become libertarians. It's a tremendous thing. And one of the things that Abdullah Öcalan said in his work, he said, we cannot have a free Kurdish society until Kurdish women are liberated. Okay, so there can be none of this Muslim oppression of Kurdish women. That's over. That's what he said. We cannot have a free Kurdish society until Kurdish women are free. And so he produced this new ideology, and it was influential with lots of people, and it was especially influential with the Kurds in the northeastern part of Syria. Okay, that little triangle there. northeastern part of Syria, right here. Now, this all happened, this efflorescence of Abdullah Öcalan's ideology with the Kurds in northeastern Syria, that all happened as the Syrian civil war was getting into high gear. Okay, so there's all kinds of rebel groups in Syria fighting the government in Damascus, and at the same time you've got ISIS, right? ISIS emerges from the U.S. military prison system in Iraq. I'll explain that in a second. But ISIS comes in and becomes a major player in the Syrian civil war. And the Kurds in the north, in that process of disintegration of the Syrian state, they see an opportunity to free themselves from the traditional oppression they have always been suffering, right? So they arm themselves with the help of the Turkish Kurds, and they liberate from ISIS a triangle that goes all the way to the Euphrates. Okay, so Euphrates, forgive me. So that the biggest piece of territory they ended up controlling went all the way down to the Euphrates. Okay, down here. This huge triangle over here is what Rojava became, because they called their movement Rojava. So these are the Rojava Kurds of the Rojava revolution. And it's a real revolution with, schools to teach the new ideology to people, and a special book that people have to study, which is Abdullah Öcalan's presentation of what he thinks a free society should look like and so forth. I mean, this is a real intellectual, cultural, deep transformation. And they really tried this out. So they organized according to cantons, autonomous cantons. They liberated Kurdish women and made them fully equal at all levels, and even instituted certain kinds of affirmative action. So, for example, the parliament has to be a minimum 40% of either sex. You can't have less than that, and things of that nature. They also instituted rules like at the different levels of administration for whatever institutions are created. There should always be a man and a woman, if I remember correctly. Things like that, right? That sound not only radical within the context of Western civilization, but are especially radical for Muslims, right? I mean, this is incredible stuff, incredible stuff. And in the area that they ended up liberating from ISIS, in which they've held for a long time. Now they're losing it. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But in that whole geography that they controlled, they protected all minorities. Okay, because these people, these Rojava Kurds, they're Westerners. Their ethics are, it's the opposite of jihad. Instead of killing infidels, they protect all minorities. So you have in that area, you have Arabs, you have Kurds, you have Christians, you have Muslims, you have all kinds of people. There's different groups. And the Rojava Kurds treated them all as equals, protected everybody, and integrated them into their political experiment. And as I said, they organized in cantons, autonomous cantons that coordinated joint defense. All right. So that's the Rojava Revolution, an extraordinary movement that wants to be that is basically Western. It's a bunch of Muslims organizing according to the ideas of an American Jew, because Murray Bookchin is an American Jew, right? And a libertarian American Jew, and they're basically Westerners. They want to ally with Israel. They want to be democratic. They emancipate women. I mean, what's not to like? Now, one of the interesting, very fascinating, almost impossibly romantic aspects of the Rojava Revolution is that the women were integrated into the armed forces at an equal level. I mean, it seems, from what I remember, that the females and the males don't fight in the same units. Like they have their female units and they have their male units, but women participate on an equal basis in the armed forces. And it turned out that the women soldiers of the Rojava Kurds were they became a strategic asset on the battlefield, because the fanatical jihadis considered it, sort of mystically humiliating to be killed by a woman. So much that if they are killed by women, they think they're not going to heaven. And that made this superstition made it very effective for the Rojava Kurds to deploy women in battle. Okay. And they kicked ISIS's ass. I mean, nobody fought ISIS better than the Rojava Kurds. ISIS, of course, is the full name is Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. As I was saying, this is the terrorist group that emerged out of the U.S. military prison system in Iraq. And you may remember them from the videos they like to do, slowly beheading their enemies, and recording everything on video, and then, sharing the videos with everybody. That's ISIS, right? And they're just a terrifying force, and they've wreaked havoc in Europe as well. There have been a number of terrorist attacks conducted by ISIS in Europe. They're just the scourge of the earth. And, orcs. So these are, this is Tolkien, right? So you got the orcs on one side, and then on the other side, you have these guys who are protecting all of the minorities, emancipating women, chanting freedom. They're the hobbits or the elves or whatever. I mean, it's so clear what's good and what's evil in the civil war in Syria, which is why what is happening now is so diagnostic of what are the true intentions of the U.S. bosses. Okay, precisely because the contrast is so clear. What is happening in Syria is completely diagnostic about the model that we should be using to explain the world. Why do I say this? Well, first, because as I was saying earlier, ISIS comes out of the military prison system that the U.S. built in Iraq. So let me show you, because we have an article precisely on that. So if you go in here in the archive and you write ISIS, you'll find this article, which explains that in these massive prisons, you're seeing one on the screen right now, in these massive prisons that the U.S. military built in Iraq, the jihadis were forcing the non-jihadis to join the jihad, and they were teaching them how to become, suicide bombers, how to make bombs and everything. And they were doing it with chalkboards, with full permission from the U.S. authorities. This is something that, so the jihadi terrorists in Iraq were called initially Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Okay, this was a branch of the mythical Al-Qaeda, according to the origin story. All right, and then they ended up calling themselves ISIS. But in the beginning, they called themselves Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And many of the members of so the Al-Qaeda in Iraq is a consequence of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Okay, Bush Jr.'s invasion of Iraq. So what did you have before? You had Saddam Hussein running Iraq, a Sunni minority government ruling over a Shia majority, because Iraq is 60% Shia, more or less. And Shia Muslims, as you know, are the other main division in the Islamic world. So you have Sunni Muslims, you have Shia Muslims. This is the main division. Iran is the most important Shia state because it has a very strong Shia majority, and it is governed by the Shia Ayatollahs according to a theocratic Shia Muslim system, right? But 60% of Iraq is also Shia. So before the U.S. invasion, you had a Sunni minority in Iraq ruling over all of Iraq. And what happened with the U.S. invasion is that immediately after the U.S. invasion, a Shia government took over in Iraq. And that Shia government has been controlled from Iran ever since Bush Jr. invaded. Okay? So in practical terms, in geopolitically, in simple descriptive geopolitical terms, what happened is the US came in, took out the Sunni minority government, and installed the Shia majority government controlled from Iran. Okay, that's what happened. Now, as this happened, a terrorist movement among the Sunnis developed. Okay, this is a problem that Iraq didn't have before. There was no real big problem with terrorism in Iraq before this, but now a Sunni terrorist movement developed, all kinds of bombings everywhere, and so the U.S. military in Iraq created these gigantic prisons and started putting terrorists in there. But they also put a lot of people in there who had been, fingered by someone or other, accused of something or other, but they were innocent. They hadn't done anything, and they just threw him in there. There was no due process, nothing. So what happened inside the prison is that the generals in charge would allow the jihadis to control the social life of the prison. And so all of these people who were not jihadis, who were not terrorists, who were thrown in there arbitrarily and who learned to hate the gringos precisely because they had been treated in this way, arbitrarily thrown in prison, right? They became the recruits of the jihadis inside the prison, precisely because the US generals were allowing these guys to run it. Now, what I'm telling you is what the defectors of Al-Qaeda in Iraq explained to the BBC. Okay, so people who left Al-Qaeda in Iraq, who were members of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but then left, maybe people who had been recruited in this manner inside the prisons, who were not jihadis before, maybe they were people like that, and then they really didn't like it and they left. Some of these people spoke to the BBC and told the BBC that they couldn't understand what the US generals were doing, because inside the prisons, they were allowing the jihadis to teach classes on jihadi ideology and bomb making and how to be a suicide bomber and all this stuff. And all of that activity is what produced Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which became ISIS. All of the main leaders of ISIS came out of the US prisons, okay, including Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who became the supreme leader of ISIS. So anyway, that's the article you want to go read if you want to understand how the U.S. How U.S. policy in Iraq produced ISIS. Now, the most amazing thing about this story, and you'll also read about that in this article, is that after 5 years of these prisons operating, the U.S. authorities simply closed the prison system down and let everybody go. So the 5-year experience with this prison system was like an incubator for jihadi terrorism. So if you wanted to do this on purpose, right, this is exactly what you would do. If you wanted to create an incubator for jihadi terrorism, you would, of course, invade the country to force the now persecuted Sunni, not force, but to nudge the now persecuted Sunni minority on whom the new Shia government will be taking revenge, right? You nudge them into becoming terrorists. Once they become terrorists, you create these prisons, you throw them in there, but you also throw a lot of people who are not terrorists, who become, the human material for this jihadi movement to grow, okay? And you let the jihadis run the prison. And then after a few years of incubating this, you close it all down and you let them go. You set them loose on the world. That's what you would do if you were going to do this on purpose, right? It's exactly what you would do. And that's exactly what the US government did. To the astonishment of the Iraqi government that the US had themselves installed in Iraq. Right, so the new government in Baghdad, they were complaining when the prison system was closed down. They were complaining about it vociferously. They were like, "Wait a minute, what are you doing? How can you You can't let these people go. This is Al Qaeda in Iraq. There's lots of members of Al Qaeda in Iraq in these prisons. The local sheikhs, the local whatchamacall them, the the people who run the local communities, the sheikhs, they were complaining too. The government, the Iraqi government, even told the U.S. government. They said, look, if you're not going to hold these people, we will hold them. Just give us the evidence, the intelligence we need to know who committed which crime, and we will hold them in prison if you don't want to hold them. And the U.S. Authorities refused to share that intelligence with the Iraqi authorities, and these people were just let go. That's what happened. So it's no exaggeration to say that ISIS is a U.S. production. Now, about Syria, let's go back to Syria. So let me share this again. So in Syria, so look at the sequence. So first of all, you have the U.S. creation of ISIS in Iraq. Then ISIS creates a civil war in Iraq, which then spreads to Syria. Okay. In Syria, the people who defeat ISIS, the best fighters against ISIS, are these Rojava Kurds, who are Democrats, who emancipate women, who are Westerners, who want to be allied with the West and with Israel, etc. Who is it that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, sent into Syria to create the Syrian branch of his movement? That's Ahmed al-Jolani, okay? Or Ahmed al-Shara. This is the guy who is now running Syria from Damascus, okay? This is the guy who, when Syria became a mess because Israel was bombing Hezbollah positions, and Hezbollah had to move some people into Israel to defend Hezbollah in Israel and also to avoid the bombing. And those movements allowed Ahmed al-Shara, who was trapped up here in the Idlib province, right? It allowed him to make a beeline for Damascus, and basically try to take it over. Now, that would have been impossible. It would have been impossible for al-Jolani to really take over in Damascus if Donald Trump had not stopped the Israelis. Okay, so the Israelis were advancing from the south. They were advancing from here, right, towards the north, with support from the Druze, because the southern portion of Syria has many Druze there who were asking for Israeli protection. So they could have moved up north and joined with the Rojava Kurds. And if the Israelis had done that, with the Druze and with the Rojava Kurds, they could have liberated all of Syria from the terrorists. Okay? But what did Trump do? Trump told his faithful servant, Benjamin Netanyahu, who always does what Trump wants, told him to stop, to recognize the al-Jolani as the new government in Damascus, and to negotiate with al-Jolani. And Netanyahu did all that. Okay? And then Trump went to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia to shake al-Jolani's hand and recognize him as the new legitimate government in Damascus. Plus, Donald Trump then announced that he would be lifting sanctions on Syria so that these terrorists that now run Syria can have a lot of money with which to build their forces. Okay? Kurds. Well, the Rojava Kurds from the beginning, I mean, if you look at this, let's see, let me move this up. I don't know why I can't move this. Hold on. Okay. I know why. Okay, this is because I made it big. Here we go. So look at the map, and you'll see in a second that the Rojava Kurds are trapped between the ISIS terrorists and Turkey. That was a very bad situation to be in, because even though they were trying to get some support from the Turkish Kurds in the north, right up here, well, the border is controlled by Turkey. This is the Turkish state up here, right? So the Turkish government, which is a jihadi government, it's run by Erdogan, who's a jihadist, um, wants to destroy the Rojava Kurds. Of course, he's been calling them terrorists from day one. Why? Because he's worried that the Rojava experiment will inspire the Kurds in Turkey. He already has a problem with Kurdish demands for autonomy, right? And perhaps independence. So, plus, Erdogan is an ally of ISIS. He's a no, that's not the word. He's like a godfather of ISIS, all right? He's been arming ISIS from the beginning. And of course, in this, Erdogan is tightly allied with US policy, of course. They always are. So the Rojava Kurds are sandwiched, right, between the Turkish terrorists and the ISIS terrorists. And they were trying to get a corridor to the sea. There was this Afrin canton in the west, you can see, that is separated from the rest of Rojava, but they're both yellow because the Afrin canton was allied with Rojava, but they could never close that gap. They could never quite close that gap, and I think they didn't. But anyway, if they did, it's no those things are no longer united. I think the Afrin canton has been destroyed. And if the Rojava Kurds don't get help from the U.S. or from Israel, it's difficult to see. I mean, they're in a very difficult situation, right? Because they're sandwiched. So, who should Donald Trump support? Should Donald Trump be supporting ISIS, the people who behead people on video? Or should he be supporting the movement that emancipated Kurdish women and wants to build a democratic Syria? I think the answer is obvious. But Trump, following on the policy of earlier presidents, is supporting ISIS in Syria. Remember, Donald Trump claimed that he had defeated ISIS? Okay, now you know that your reality is managed, because what he recognized in Syria is the government of ISIS. And what is happening right now, the reason I titled this podcast, The Kurds Must Fight, the Rojava Kurds Must Fight, is that the new government, the new ISIS government in Damascus, just recently launched an attack against the Rojava Kurds. So what they said is you have to disarm, because what the government, the ISIS government in Damascus is saying is that they're the government now, so they're going to be the only armed force in Syria. And so therefore, the fact that the Rojava Kurds are armed is illegal, according to them. And so they have to disarm. So the Rojava Kurds, of course, didn't want to disarm. Why would you want to disarm when the government is ISIS, right? So they don't want to disarm. They had been fighting Jolani before, and they know what he's capable of, right? They know what he's like. So they don't want to drop their arms, their weapons. So next thing you know, Jolani attacks them and defeats them. He pushes them back from the Euphrates. And they lost a couple of very important towns, including Deir ez-Zor. So now there's a ceasefire. And the Rojava Kurds have been given a month to think about what they're going to do. And if they decide to lay down their arms, they're being offered to integrate their forces with the Syrian government forces. This is the let us say the public offer that is being made. And if they don't decide to do that in this month, that they're going to have a ceasefire according to what they agreed, then ISIS al-Jolani will renew the attack against the Rojava Kurds, of course, supported by the Turks. So they're in a very difficult position. And meanwhile, what the US government has said is that the Rojava Kurds must lay down their arms and do what the government in Damascus wants. That's what Donald Trump is saying. Okay, so in Syria, we have a microcosmos that is perfectly diagnostic of what the true policy of the US bosses is. They nurtured ISIS first in Iraq, then they did what they needed to do to let ISIS take over Syria. And now they're supporting ISIS, destroying the only movement that was any hope for Syria, which is the Rojava Kurds and their Syrian Democratic Forces. This was the only hope for Syria. And Trump is now supporting that ISIS destroy it. I think it's perfectly obvious. And I think it's perfectly consistent with, and remember, these ISIS terrorists, they want to destroy Israel. Okay, the next attack on Israel from Syria is being prepared. That's what's going on. These people are arming. Lots of Houthis are coming into Syria right now. And I'm sure people from Iraq are also moving into Syria. And the next big attack is being prepared. And that's what Donald Trump is supporting. That's what he is supporting. So this is perfectly consistent, I was going to tell you, with what's happening in Iran, right? So what we've seen over the last few days is Donald Trump doing everything he can to avoid hurting the Ayatollahs, right? It is so important for Donald Trump to avoid hurting the Ayatollahs that he will even pay the price of being ridiculous, of being absurd. Because what Donald Trump did is he threatened the Ayatollahs, right? So first you had these protests in Iran, these widespread protests all over the country, demanding that the Ayatollah government in Iran step down. Okay, they've reached that point. They don't want any reforms. They're not asking for anything specific. They want these guys to go. And in the middle of that, with thousands of people in the streets all over Iran, Donald Trump says, because he needs to do this, right? He needs to look macho and he needs to look like he doesn't like jihadis because that's the grammar. You can't have a US president openly saying Allahu Akbar. It's not grammatical. That's not the grammar. He has to pretend to be an enemy of jihadis. So he inflates his chest, right? Like he does. And he says, if the Iranian Ayatollahs fire on the protesters, I will shoot them. I will shoot on them. We'll start shooting, I think he said. We will start shooting. That's what he said. Very macho. So what happened? The Iranian Ayatollahs started firing on the protesters. And Donald Trump then said, wait, but they told me that they were not going to do that anymore. They're stopping. It stopped. And they told me that they're not going to have the execution, so I'm not going to do anything. Ridiculous. If the Iranian Ayatollahs were really the enemies of Donald Trump, it's impossible to imagine a situation where they have given Donald Trump more excuses to attack them. The Iranian state, the Iranian jihadi state, is a terrorist organization that has monthly rituals or weekly rituals, I don't know, but at least monthly rituals in which they chant "Death to America" as an official kind of state ritual. They are dedicated to international terrorism. They have proxy forces in the north and in the south of Israel, some of the worst terrorists in the world, or the worst. They're oppressing their own population, shooting at their own people. But, I mean, if Donald Trump wanted to take them out, it's impossible to imagine a scenario where he has a better excuse. And yet, he pays the price of being absurd, of being ridiculous, so long as he can protect the jihadis in Iran. Okay? His behavior is equally absurd in Syria. He was supposed to be the ISIS killer. He told us that he had defeated ISIS, and now he has installed an ISIS government in Damascus, and he's supporting that the ISIS terrorists destroy the only democratic movement in Syria. Well, it's very clear. It's very, very clear. And it's consistent with everything else that Donald Trump has done. Donald Trump stopped the Israelis in Lebanon, protected Hezbollah. He stopped the Israelis in Iran, came into the 12-day war, dropped a few bombs so that he could take narrative control, and then stop the war, right? He stopped the Israelis in Gaza. He stopped the Israelis in Qatar, extended NATO level protection to Qatar, Qatar is the other sugar daddy of Hamas. It's all perfectly consistent. The next genocide has already begun. It began on October 7th. And Donald Trump is going to make sure that it is completed. That's what's going on. So the Rojava Kurds must fight. They must fight because nobody is coming to help them. Nobody is going to help you. You must fight. The ISIS terrorists are going to exterminate you. So you must fight. This is the only option you have. That doesn't mean, this is not obviously not good news, but if you don't fight, you're finished. The Rojava Kurds must fight. They should not trust the U.S. bosses. No promises made by the U.S. government should be believed. It should be clear by now because the Kurds have been betrayed in Iraq and Iran and Turkey, everywhere. Every time that the U.S. government makes a promise to the Kurds, they betray the Kurds. So we should know by now that there is no sense in trusting promises that the U.S. government makes to any Kurds. And they're not making that many promises anyway, right? They're making it clear that they're withdrawing their support for the Rojava Kurds. They've made that very clear, such as it was, because it didn't amount to more than putting a few U.S. positions inside Rojava territory, because the U.S. government didn't even defend the Rojava Kurds when the Turks started attacking them. Okay, so I am sorry that you're in this situation. I admire your movement. I think you are a light for the entire Muslim world, and I hope that the Kurds in Turkey take it seriously, and in Iraq take it seriously, that this is a fight for the future of all Kurds. And I'm sorry that you've been betrayed so many times, but you have to assimilate this point. They're not going to help you. Nobody's going to help you. You have to fight. The Kurds have to fight. Anyway, that's my podcast for today. We will be talking about the Kurdish situation again. I have one more article to publish on this, and it's coming out very soon. In the meantime, stay free, fight for the West, like the video, subscribe, and share all you